The Ezu Chag, we're on Chesam and Beis HaChodesh Miskasebo. There's only 1 month, which is the candidate month for a Chag, in which the Chag falls out at the first of the month when the moon is absolutely invisible. And that's going to be Rosh Hashanah, the only Rosh Hashanah, because all 3 regalim, all other holidays, and including Yom Kippur for the 4th, are all in the middle of the month. The only holiday that coincides with the beginning of the month is Rosh Hashanah. And the pasuk ends by saying, Ki chok Yisrael mishpat le'elokei Yaakov. We're going to soon see that chok Yisrael means the judgment of Israel. And the mishpat at the end of this pasuk is referring to the judgment of the other nations of the world. And all this takes place on that very day when we blow the shofar on the holiday in which the moon is covered, namely on Rosh Hashanah. Tana Rabbanu, we learned in the Brayso, Ki chok Yisrael mishpat le'elokei Yaakov. Melamed shein bezdin shel mala nichnasim l'din elim kain kidshu bezdin shel matis hachodesh. And only after the bezdin shel mata decides when is Rosh Chodesh, only then that koveya the bezdin shel mala to judge every person on the face of the globe. And when Klal Yisrael koveh the chodesh, the chok hachodesh, that's going to be the day of mishpat le'elokei Yaakov, of judgment. In fact, I would add here that there's a famous medrash that up in Shomayim they anticipated a certain day it would be Rosh Hashanah of Tishrei. They set up all the benches for the court on high, and then Bezdin down here decided that the month of Elul would be Moled, which means they added another day to the month of Elul, and they postponed Rosh Hashanah. So the Medrash describes how the Malachim took all the benches and they removed them, and a day later they brought them out again. Tanya Edith, we learned in a different Brayso, Yisrael who ain't Elul Yisrael. Is this day of Rosh Hashanah only a judgment for Klal Yisrael? No, Liumas Olaminan, how do I know that all human beings are judged on Rosh Hashanah? Talmud Lomar, Mishpat Le'elokei Yaakov. It's a Mishpat for the God of Yaakov. Now, what is this pasuk adding? It seems totally redundant. You just finished telling me at the beginning of the pasuk, Chok Yisrael. But rather, Mishpat means Mishpat Li'umas Ha'olam, up in Shamayim of Elokei Yaakov. The God of Jacob will now preside over the judgment of the entire world, and that's called the Mishpat of the Umos Ha'olam. Now, there's a whole discussion here in the commentaries, if you're interested. I mean, it's a fascinating issue as to why judgment, the day of judgment in the heavens, coincides with the day in which the moon is not visible. It's a very interesting topic. Anyway, why did the Torah, I mean, in this pasuk in Tehillim, why did it isolate and focus in a singular way on the Mishpat Yisrael? If there's going to be a judgment for all the people, all the human beings in the world, then the Jewish people likewise are included in humanity, although some anti-Semites would deny that. And therefore, we already know that they're going to be judged on this day. So why did the Torah have to go ahead and say, Chok Yisrael, that there's a specific singular judgment of Israel? Melamed, sheYisrael Nitnasim Tchil L'Din. That first God will judge us. You might say, well, I'm not so excited about being judged. Wait a while, let me know. It's best to be first. Because at that point, God is not what we call, again, Kaviyachol, angry. When he gets to the world and he sees what the matzav is, then he gets very angry. So you don't want to be last, because at that point there's divine wrath. So let's give first dibs to the Jewish people. Rav Chizda, like Rav Chizda says, the Omer Rav Chizda, Melech v'tzibur. Imagine there's going to be judgment of the king himself and of the community, or members of the community. It's interesting that the Gemara already was aware, and this is also in Sanhedrin, that a king would be judged, which is fascinating. Rav Chizda, the Omer Rav Chizda, Melech v'tzibur, Melech nifnas tchilu din. We give first honor to the king to be judged Shenemar, based on the tefillah of Shlomo Melech in Melachim Aleph Perek Ches, Lasos Mishpat Avdo, and then Mishpat Amo. And Avdo here is an allusion to Shlomo Melech himself. My timer. What's the logic here? This principle, which Rav Chizah derived from the pasuk in Malachim. The Gemara says, if you like, I'll give you the following explanation. We'll see two explanations. Make him malka broy. It's not derech eretz to leave the melech standing outside, waiting until the judgment of the tzibur is there. He should be judged first. It's embarrassing for the king that he has to wait for his turn. It's better that he be judged before divine wrath is incurred by the judgment of the Umos Ha'ol. The Mishnah says that Aleph Tishrei is Rosh Hashana L'Shmita. Minolan, Tichsiv says in the pasuk in Parshas Bahar, U'b'shana Shviyis Shabbat Shabbason Yela Aretz. And now we're going to introduce what's called the Gzeirat Shabbat, which means that we have the word Shana. The Gamar Shana B'Tishrei. We're going to look for the word Shana elsewhere in order to figure out when is the initiation of Shvius, when is the beginning of the year of Shvius. It's B'Shana, and Shana is, in this context, a reference to the beginning of the year of Tishrei. Tichsiv, where else do I find the word Shana for Gzeira Shava? Merishis Hashana, from the beginning of the year, which is Tishrei. So you see in both cases, it says either Bashana or Hashana, and that's a Gzeira Shava to teach me that Shemitah begins on Aleph Tishrei. This Gemara is not interested right now in what's called Tosefah Shmitas, where we add another month of El before Shemitah. So the Gemara says, "V'ligmar Shana Shana b'Nisan." The word Shana appears also in the context of Nisan. D'chsiv Rishon hu l'chol chodshei Hashana. So if we substitute a new Gzeirat Shava, and instead of plugging in Mereshis Hashana, we plug in Rishon hu lachem l'chodshei Hashana, then we're referring to the first month of the year being Nisan, and therefore Shvius should be initiated by Nisan. So the Gemara answers, Danim Shana she'eni machadashim b'Shana she'eni machadashim. V'yein Danim Shana she'eni machadashim b'Shana she'yeshi machadashim. The Gemara is pointing out that there's a two-word phrase over here. It says in the pasuk in Bo, it says Lechadshei Hashem. So we're talking about the months of the year. We're not talking about the year, but the months of the year. Nisan is the first of the months, which means that Iyar is the second of the month, etc. And when we have a Gzeirat Shava, there are two candidates. We'll take the one that's more precise, where the two words are identical. And that's going to give me the Gzeirat Shava between Shvius, where it says B'Shana, and Rosh Hashana, where it says Reichis Hashana, to the exclusion of the words Chodshei Hashana in the case of Nisan. The Mishnah says, V'lei Yovlos, Aleph Tishrei is not only Rosh Hashanah for Shemitah, but it's also Rosh Hashanah for Yovel. And the Gemara now presents a machlokes tanoim here on Daf Ches Amud Beis regarding when Yovel begins. Because as we said earlier, the shofar is only blown on the 10th of Tishrei. And here in our Mishnah, Rosh Hashanah leYovlos is Aleph Tishrei. So the Gemara asks, Yovlos be Echad b'Tishreihu? Yovlos b'Asara b'Tishreihu? Yovel is initiated, the year of Kedushas Yovel, the 50th year, is initiated on Yom Kippur. Tichsiv, as the pasuk says, I'll read the whole pasuk, V'avarta shofar trua b'chodesh hashvi'i b'asar lachodesh b'yom HaKippurim taviru shofar. So we blow the shofar on the 10th of the month on Yom Kippur, and that generates the sanctity of Yovel. But this pasuk, by the way, comes immediately before the following pasuk. The next pasuk is V'kidashtem eshnasa chamishim shana. Ukrosem droba oretz kol yoshver v'shavtem ish al achuzaso. So it seems like all the dinim of shiluach avodim, that the avodim go free, and that the sodas go back to their original owners. That doesn't emerge until Yom Kippur after Tkiyas HaShofar. Moran says Halmani, who's the author of that Mishnah, Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Brokahi, and he's of the opinion that Yovel and all the dinim of Yovel are initiated on Aleph Tishrei. We don't wait till the shofar is blown 10 days later. The Sanya, we learned in a Brisa, and this pasuk is completely superfluous because immediately before it, it says, "V'safartu lecha sheva shabbosos shanim, v'hoyu lecha yemei sheva shabbosos shanim, teisha v'arboim shana, v'avartem shofar trua b'chodesh hashvi." So it means that in Chodesh Hashvi, which is Tishrei, we have completed now 49 years, the counting of 49 years, and now we're going into the 50th year. So why did the Torah, in a redundant kind of way, have to repeat V'kidashtem Mishnas Chamishim Shini? Ma Talmud Lomi. So what is this pasuk teaching me? Lefi shenemar, since it says B'yom HaKippurim, I might think Yochol Lo Tehei Miskadeshes El Yom HaKippurim the Elech. Perhaps I would entertain the idea, which in fact is going to be accepted by another Shi, but now we're going with Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says you might think that the sanctity of Yom Kippur, of Yovel, has to be delayed and postponed until the 10th of the month. This extra redundant pasuk, Malama is come to teach us that the year of Yovel becomes sanctified, from Aleph Tishrei, and Mikan Omer Rabbi Yishmael Brono Shu Rabbi Yochanan Broka, Mi Rosh Hashana Vad Yom HaKippurim. Okay, now it gets a little bit more challenging. Even though Rabbi Yishmael is of the opinion that Yovel is initiated on Aleph Tishrei, that's the 50th year, right? But nevertheless, the Torah says blow the shofar and then sanctify the 50th year. So that shofar blowing 10 days later, we doesn't account for that 10-day period. So what's the status of that 10-day period between Aleph Tishrei, which is Rosh Hashana Yovel, and the 10th of Tishrei, which is the blowing of the shofar? The slaves could not go home to their houses. But on the other hand, the Adon, the master, could no longer lord it over them because it's already after Aleph Tishrei. Ella, Ochlin v'shosin v'smeichim, they're going to rejoice because they know in a few days' time they'll be free, they'll be able to return to their homes. And the Atroseim Barasheim. Now the Atara is worn by free men. Again, this is something sociological. It comes from a different period of time. But you've seen also pictures of ancient, civilizations, and very often you'll see that they wear these hats, special hats. It's not exactly so today, but in those days. So a free man would wear a hat, and a slave would not wear a hat. A slave would go bareheaded. But now that Aleph Tishrei of the 50th year has already passed, the Avodim could now put on the Ataros, these crowns, and they could manifest their dress as that of a Ben Chorim, because technically they already freed slaves. Kevan Shigir Yom HaKippurim, Taku Bezdin B'Shofar, and the Niftu Avodim L'Bateim V'Sados Chosros L'Baleim. So again, even though Iker Yovel, according to Rabbi Yishmael, is initiated on Rosh Hashana, because when the pasuk says V'kidashtem Eshnasa Chamishim Shana, that redundant pasuk teaches me Sheshnas Hayom Miskadeshes. from Aleph Tishrei, but nevertheless, it's Xeris HaKosov that the Avodah should not go free and return to their homes, and the Sodos should not be returned to the original Bailim until after the shofar is blown on Yom Kippur. Now, in order to understand the sheet, you have to be a Brisker lamp. You have no choice. What Reb Chaim Brisker used to call Tzvei Dinim. Now, I'm not exactly sure what the Tzvei Dinim are. I have a feeling that maybe the first din is in the status of the Eved, and the second din, in other words, there may be two dinim. There's one din in the kedusha, the sanctity of Yovel, to change the status of the Eved, and then there's another din in dinim moments, that the Eved becomes kanu liatzmo. He acquires his own possession of himself. Like, for example, during this 10-day period of time, according to Rabbi Shmuel, I wonder what would happen if the Eved would find a lost object. I don't know if it would be his, or he's not yet kones atzmo. He doesn't have his own yad l'kinyam. I don't know. I mean, for this you have to really learn the sugya be'ir. So the Gemara asked for Rabbanon. They hold that the entire enterprise of Yovel is postponed until after Shofar on Yom Kippur. So when they see the pasuk Kidashtem Mishnasa Chavishim Shana, they would interpret it, not the way Rabbi Shmuel interpreted it, as referring to the 10th of Tishrei of Yom Kippurim. So why did the pasuk bother saying that which we know? It's redundant. My answer is Shanim Ato Makadesh V'Yato Makadesh Chadash. So this really is a sugya later on, which we haven't even touched on. It's at the very end of Rosh Hashana. And there's a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Tzadok in the Mishnah Chav Daled about whether we're Makadesh L'Chodesh or we're not Makadesh L'Chodesh. And we don't know what that's about. I mean, if it's a mole and it's 30 days, I understand Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Tzadok that there's no need to be Makadesh L'Chodesh. It's Mekudesh V'Yom Ne'ela because there's no such thing as a month with 31 days. But in any event, this pasuk is coming for a mute to tell you that, yes, you sanctify the years in order to sanctify Yovel, but you don't sanctify the months. And that reflects the Shita of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Tzadok, whereas, we hold that there is Kiddush Hashana. Tanya, either we learned in another brisa, Yovel he, Ma'al Lomar. We already had beforehand Yovel. So what's the pasuk again repeating Yovel he? I might think right. In other words, we're going now according to Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says the sanctity of the year of Yovel is initiated on Aleph Tishrei, and yet we don't blow the shofar until Yom Kippur. So it's like a tosefes of 10 days. Is we might think, therefore, kach miskadesh v'leches b'sofa. Now, when you finish the 50th year, there's another 10-day period until Yom Kippur. So maybe that's also going to be a tosefes, a tag along. The altisma. And you'll ask me, what am I, crazy? I mean, how could it be possible that even in the 51st year, the first 10 days of that 51st year would be considered Yovel? And it would be sanctified with Kedushas Yovel. I mean, we're in the 51st year. Don't ask me such a question, because I haven't answered that question. We have a principle in days and times, periods that are sanctified, that we can extend their kedusha, their sanctity. So therefore, the Torah has to say Shnas HaChamishim Atam HaKadesh Ve'i Atam HaKadesh Es Shnas HaChamishim V'Achas. So Lafuki, that svara of Tosefes Yovel, the Torah went out of its way to say Shnas HaChamishim, meaning the 50th year, not the 51st year. And now we're on Daf Tesam and Aleph. Rabbanan hold that Yovel begins only on Yom Kippur, 10 days later. So we don't need a pasuk to teach me that don't extend the Yovel into the next year. So what did the Chachamim do with this extra pasuk? Gemara answers, Shnas Chamishim Atamone, V'Atamone Shnas Chamishim V'Achas. So this pasuk Yovel he Shnas Chamishim, which we used earlier to darshan that the Yovel does not extend and enter into the 51st year, now is being used by the Rabbanan for a different drasha of Iyat Hamona Shnas Chamishim Ve'achas. And that means that the minyan of Shnas HaYovel will only begin after the year of the Yovel, right? Because the Rabbanan say that the Yovel begins on the 10th of Tishrei. So you might say, well, now when we count the years, we should consider those first 10 days as belonging to last year, and then add another year and say that from Yom Kippur on, we're up to year number 51. Lafuki Mishitas Rabbi Yehuda, Tiyomar Shnas Chamishim Ola Lakan Ulakan, that the 50th year of Yovel can be counted in both directions. It's going to be the 50th year belonging to the previous counting, and it's also going to be counted as the 51st year, which means that Shemitah will be 6 years after the Yovel, according to Rabbi Yehuda. That's what the Mishnah, that's what the Torah wants to teach me, the law, that we don't say such. But rather, the minyan of Shanim of Yovel for the next 50 years will begin in the year after Yovel. And the year of Yovel would not be one of the years to be counted. So this is where we're going to stop here on Daf Tes Amud Aleph. And we're up to Minai. How many lines down is that from the top? Minol. So it's 1, 2, 3, 5 lines down from the top. So the previous stuff, which was Zion, which was the Shabbos stuff, already uploaded if you're interested on why you